In at number 5, Annabelle. The Annabelle doll is the most prominent piece found in the Warrens' occult museum, trapped inside a glass case with a sign that reads, "Warning, positively do not open." This Raggedy Ann doll was initially purchased in a thrift store in 1970 by a mother looking for a birthday present for her daughter Donna. Donna, who was in college at the time and shared an apartment with her roommate Angie, loved the doll at first and took it home with her. Over the course of the next few days, Donna and Angie started to notice something odd about the doll. It seemed to move around the house on its own, never where they had left it, and it would change its position. One time they even found it standing on its feet. Then strange messages written on scraps of paper started to appear all over their apartment, looking as if they were written by a child. A bit freaked out, Donna and Angie called a medium, who told them that the doll was possessed by a little girl named Annabelle, who had died in their apartment building years ago. Annabelle told the medium that she liked the two girls and wanted to stay with them. The young woman allowed it, but much to their dismay, they would soon find out that Annabelle wasn't who she said she was. One of their male friends named Lou stayed the night at their apartment and woke up in the middle of the night to find Annabelle next to him, appearing to move. The doll then tried to strangle him, and the next morning he woke up to find himself covered in cuts and burns. This is when Donna reached out to a priest, who then brought in the Warrens. The Warrens discovered that the doll wasn't actually possessed at all. Instead, a demon was manipulating it, trying to get close to the girls in an attempt to possess one of them. No thanks. In at number 4, the Smurl Haunting. In between 1974 and 1989, a couple by the name of Jack and Janet Smurl, who lived in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, claimed that a demon inhabited their home. Jack and Janet began witnessing strange happenings, the likes of loud noises and bad odors. The torment continued to get worse. Their dog was thrown into a wall, their daughter was pushed down their stairs, and Jack claims to have been physically and sexually assaulted by the demon on multiple occasions. The Warrens didn't get involved in the case until 1986, and the reports were pretty disturbing. Ed claimed to see a dark mass form inside of the home, and that the temperature dropped severely. The demon even left them a message written on a mirror that read, "Get out." By 1987, the haunting had calmed down to an extent, with Janet telling reporters that they still heard knocking and saw shadows occasionally. After the Smurls left the house, the new house owner told reporters in 1988 that she never encountered anything supernatural while living there. The Smurl haunting had generated a lot of press attention over the years, and there were a lot of doubts about the legitimacy of the Smurls' claims. And at number 3, the Perron Family. You might recognize the Perron family as the story that is depicted in the first Conjuring film. Now, back in January of 1971, the Perron family moved into an old farmhouse, a 14-room building in Rhode Island. Roger, Carolyn, and their 5 daughters began to notice strange occurrences shortly after moving in, like missing objects, odd noises, and small piles of dirt appearing in previously clean rooms. The girls began noticing spirits around the house, most of which were harmless, but some were a bit more aggressive. Things got worse. The spirits would cause their beds to rise off the floor, and they would smell like rotting flesh. Carolyn researched the house and discovered that it had a long history of people dying from mysterious circumstances, with some hanging themselves in the attic, and others drowning in the creek nearby. One spirit in particular, Bathsheba, was a spirit of a woman who lived on the property in the mid-1800s, who was a Satanist, and was somehow involved in the death of a neighbor's child. The Warrens visited the farmhouse multiple times, and on one occasion, Lorraine conducted a seance, which led to Carolyn becoming possessed and speaking in tongues. The family, due to financial strain, was forced to live in the house until 1980, but reportedly the hauntings had ceased by then. Up next, number 2, the Enfield Poltergeist. The Enfield Poltergeist is the story that appears in the second Conjuring film. In 1977, the Hodgson family, who lived in Enfield, England, began to see and hear strange things in their home, including a dresser sliding across one of the children's bedrooms. Toys would fly around the house and were burning hot to the touch. Loud knocking sounds shook the house, to the point where they had to call the police, believing that someone was trying to break into their home. The officer who came to the scene reported seeing a chair rise up into the air and move across the floor all on its own. Reporters from the Daily Mirror were also present at one point, and they claimed that they had also witnessed some of these strange occurrences. The situation really started to attract some solid attention when one day, the iron fireplace in one of the bedrooms upstairs was ripped out of the wall. Warrens came to the house and upon investigating declared that there was a demonic presence there. While the film depicts an almost exorcism, the real-life story is quite different. 2 years after the hauntings began, they abruptly stopped. And finally, in at number 1, Amityville. Even if you're unfamiliar with the specifics of this story, you've probably at some point heard the name Amityville in correlation with horror or hauntings. Amityville is a real-life place, approximately 30 miles outside of New York City. And back in 1974, a 23-year-old man named Ronald J. DeFeo Jr. murdered his entire family with a rifle while they slept. 13 months afterwards, a new family purchased the house, the Lutz family, who stayed there for 28 days before fleeing. The Lutz family claimed that their house was haunted by a violent spirit. After their first night there, the family began constantly getting into arguments. Their daughter started to spend all of her time playing with an imaginary friend named Jody. Awful odors emanated from all over the house, and black stains started to appear on various surfaces. Flies started to appear in one of the upstairs rooms that they had turned into a sewing room. George Lutz, the father, would always wake up at 3:15 a.m., the time in which the DeFeo murders occurred according to the police. Family members started to appear aged and would levitate, so finally they got a priest to walk through the house. But the family still continued to be terrorized. 20 days after the family left the house, the Warrens were called in to investigate. While they were there, Ed was violently pushed to the floor and Lorraine was overwhelmed by a demonic presence and saw the psychic impressions of the DeFeo family's bodies laid along the floor. Further research into the house revealed that it was actually the site used by a man named John Ketchum in the early 1900s who practiced black magic. They also captured an image of a boy peering from the second floor of the house. The Lutzes eventually sold all of their belongings, some to the Warrens, and relocated to California.
At number 5, the trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. Also known as the Devil Made Me Do It case, this is the first recorded court case in United States history that used demonic possession as basis for a defendant's claim that had ultimately resulted in the first-degree manslaughter of Connecticut man Alan Bono. It began with the Glatzel family after their 11-year-old son David had allegedly been possessed by a demonic beast who assaulted him in an attic. This manifested itself as David began to experience night terrors, exhibit strange behaviour and fall victim to unexplained wounds, scratches and bruises. Of course, after calling upon the services of a Catholic priest and finding no resolution, the family contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren. Soon after, Lorraine witnessed a black mist around David, an apparent indication of demonic involvement, as well as red hand marks around his neck, a demon choking him. The Warrens attempted to perform 3 exorcisms on the boy, where during one attempt the demon spoke out and said that David's stepfather, Arne Johnson, would commit a murder when the demonic host would go on to possess him itself. Well, that's exactly what happened, strangely enough, and Arne Johnson was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. He still maintains that he was possessed by a demon to this day, despite the court not believing so. Coming in at number 4, the Werewolf of London. Well, that's a title if I've ever heard one. Do you know anything about lycanthropy? The supernatural transformation of a person into a wolf? On the other hand, scientifically speaking, defined as clinical lycanthropy, a rare psychiatric disorder that involves the delusion of bestial transformation, often exhibited as a wolf. Meet Bill Ramsey, a London man or wolf who had allegedly demonstrated demonically possessed lycan behaviour since the age of 9. In 1983, as a grown man, he admitted himself to an institution, desperate to get help for his affliction. According to Bill, he would display superhuman strength and feel a rabid, frenzied urge to bite his family and relatives before succumbing to a strange seizure and convulsion. While in hospital, Bill had an overwhelming craving for blood and went on to attack a nurse while barking like a dog. A few years later, after being released from hospital, he went into a wolf-like rage and attacked a police officer with superhuman force. It took 6 more police officers to finally restrain the beast, leading to widespread news coverage and mass hysteria of a werewolf in London. Of course, this caught the attention of Ed and Lorraine, and they flew him out to Connecticut, performed an exorcism on the wolf demon, and he was right as rain. Job done. Everyone's a winner. Allegedly. Next up at number 3, the Warrens' psychic photography. Although admittedly not a single case but an exhibition of quite a large number, a technique that was woven by the Warrens throughout their career as paranormal investigators. Now take this with a pinch of salt, because for those that oppose the Warrens' claims, the majority of criticism comes from their specific technique of paranormal photography. The vast majority of the Warrens' physical evidence comes from photography, racking up hundreds of ghost snaps that form the basis of their alleged paranormal evidence, which must fit 2 specific instructions for it to make the grade. Use an autofocused or fixed focus camera with an automatic flash, and the more power the flash, the better. Supposedly, the more exposition of light, the more successful it will be to catch ghosts, specifically under Lorraine's technique, which pinpoints energy vortices and allows a spirit to manifest itself. They used this technique for the entirety of their career and it never seemed to change, but for me it is probably the weakest part of their casework and has the most holes when it comes to credibility. What What do you guys think? Swinging in at our number 2 spot, Union Cemetery. According to local legend, the Union Cemetery in eastern Connecticut dates as far back as the 1700s and is infamous as one of the most haunted cemeteries in the United States. Luckily for them then, that Ed and Lorraine Warren lived pretty much next door to this hotspot hive of haunted activity. Very lucky. One of the most notorious ghosts in the graveyard is the White Lady, also known as the Lady in White, a spirit tortured by the tragedy of her mortal life. In some legends, the victim of betrayal by her husband, in other cases, murdered by her illicit boyfriend. Well, luckily for us, Ed Warren claimed to have captured footage of the White Lady on camera. He first recorded the White Lady on September 1st, 1990 at around 2:40 AM when he heard a woman weeping beyond the gravestones, looked out and saw hundreds of strange lights floating around, which manifested into the figure of a young woman dressed in white with long, dark hair. He screwed up when he walked towards the figure though, and the ghost disappeared. According to Ed's advice, you never walk towards the ghost, you let the ghost come towards you, because a human can change the molecular and magnetic field when a ghost is materializing. Useful. Well, sounds like crazy footage, right? Something to catch on camera. Well, unfortunately for us, Ed Warren refused to show evidence of this particular video, instead hoarding it for himself, despite urges for it to be analysed by the scientific community. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Snedeker House. This one is pretty messed up even when you remove the paranormal element. Otherwise known as a haunting in Connecticut, which went on to inspire the Hollywood film of the same name, although Ed and Lorraine reportedly detested the film for its historical inaccuracy, claiming that so much more happened than what the film depicted. According to them, the real story involved the Snedeker family, who purchased their family home at a knockout price due to it serving previously as, wait for it, a funeral home and mortuary. Yeah, you're kind of just asking for it there really. Not only that, but there was also a graveyard outside. Take the hint. If you take local legend into account, the house was home to some pretty vile deeds where staff at the funeral home were rumoured to have been caught in acts of necrophilia, leading to an infestation of malevolent spirits. As events unfolded, the Snedeker family were terrorised by demonic occurrences, tap water running with blood, children being mysteriously spun around by invisible forces, and the family waking up to toe tags attached to them like that of a corpse. Now, this case has been hotly disputed, and the Warrens were famously criticised for their involvement with the Snedeker family, who were reportedly involved in some serious drug and alcohol abuse, which formed the basis of their paranormal claims rather than actually being terrorized by a demonic spirit. Nevertheless, Ed and Lorraine stood by their involvement as one of the most terrifyingly paranormal occurrences throughout their entire career, and Lorraine maintains this stance long after Ed Warren's passing.
Coming in at number 5, we have The Conjuring House. Upon its release in 2013, The Conjuring quickly became a fan favourite in the horror genre, with it being met with critical acclaim. The film itself follows demonologists and ghost hunters Ed and Lorraine Warren, who head to a home in the country after a family reported demonic activity inside of their home. Now, at the time of the release, people knew very little about Ed and Lorraine Warren or the true events surrounding this investigation. The Perron family moved into their haunted Rhode Island home in 1971. Not long after, Carolyn, Roger and their 5 daughters began to experience strange goings-on. Brooms going missing, scraping noises and small piles of dirt appearing out of nowhere. All small things at first, which soon developed into big things. The girls eventually began to notice spirits around the home, with the history of the home soon being revealed. Many people had drowned in the lake, and of course the worst spirit of them all was Bathsheba, a woman who devoted herself to the devil and took her own life on the property, cursing anyone who would take her land. Ed and Lorraine Warren of course came to investigate the situation, with Lorraine conducting a seance to attempt to communicate with the spirits tormenting the family. During the seance, Carolyn became possessed, rising from the ground in her chair and speaking in tongues. Following the seance, the Warrens were kicked out of the home, with the family continuing to live there until 1980. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, it really helps out a lot. Coming in at number 4, we have Amityville. Back in September of 1977, Jay Anson published a book called The Amityville Horror, which would later become the basis of a series of films released from 1979 onwards. The book is claimed to be based on the paranormal experience of the Lutz family, a case which of course led to many controversies and widespread attention. Now, some history before diving into the story of the Lutz family. Back in November of 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his family at 112 Ocean Avenue in the suburban neighborhood in Amityville. He was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 life sentences, with him passing away in custody in March of this year. Now, DeFeo had reported that voices had told him to kill his family. Whether these claims were true, we don't know. Jumping forward, in December of 1975, George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children moved into the same home, and after just 28 days they fled the house, claiming to have been terrorized by paranormal entities while living there. On the evening of March 6, 1976, the home was investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren along with a television crew from Channel 5 New York. During the investigation, a series of pictures were taken, one of the images allegedly showing a demonic boy with glowing eyes standing at the foot of the staircase. The Warrens quite quickly suggested that the home was occupied by malevolent spirits, with the Warrens' visit to the home being depicted at the beginning of The Conjuring 2. Coming in at number 3, we have the Smurl Haunting. The Smurl Haunting took place between 1974 and 1989, with Jack and Janet Smurl of West Pittston, Pennsylvania, alleging that a demon was inhabiting their home. The claims gained a lot of attention, as you would expect, with demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren once again stepping in to solve the case. Now, the family moved into their home on Chase Street, with them claiming that they were being disturbed by a demon that caused loud noises and bad odors, with one report stating that the dog was randomly thrown across a room. In 1986, Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived at the home, and according to Ed, the demon that was inhabiting the home was incredibly powerful, with it shaking mirrors and furniture after they tried to get it to leave by playing religious music and praying. Ed even claimed that he felt a significant drop in temperature and saw a dark mass inside of the home. The demon also supposedly left a message on a mirror that read, "Get out." Ed and Lorraine Warren went on to state that their experience at the Smurl residence was unlike anything they had investigated at the time. Coming in at number 2, we have the Snedeker House. Now, many of you will be familiar with the Snedeker House haunting thanks to the movie The Haunting in Connecticut. The Haunting in Connecticut movie was released in 2009 and directed by Peter Cornwell, and supposedly follows the alleged haunting of Carmen Snedeker and her family. Now, the movie has a ton of controversy surrounding it, with the author of the book the movie was based on even distancing himself from the accuracy of the events depicted in the book. Now, the film itself specifically focuses on the fictional Campbells as they move into the new home, which was formerly a mortuary to mitigate the strains of travel on Matt, her cancer-stricken son. However, not long after moving into the new home, the family becomes haunted by violent and supernatural forces. Now, the true story is a lot different. In 1986, Carmen and Alan Snedeker moved into a new home with their daughter and 3 sons. While exploring the home, they discovered tools used by morticians. Very creepy indeed. With it being discovered to be a former funeral parlor, with the eldest son beginning to see ghosts and be haunted by terrifying visions. The family eventually turned to demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who proclaimed that the home was infested with demons. Now, this is supposedly all very much true, however many have had their doubts over the years, including Snedeker's landlord, who found the entire story ridiculous, even noting that prior to the family moving in, there had been no complaints or unusual activity inside of the home. On top of that, the Snedekers stayed for a total of 2 years before finally deciding to leave. And finally, coming in at number 1, we've got Enfield Poltergeist. Taking the Warrens across the ocean, the Enfield Poltergeist has become a popular paranormal case, with it also being the focal point for The Conjuring 2. The Conjuring 2 was released in 2016 and followed Ed and Lorraine as they traveled to Enfield in the United Kingdom to assist the Hodgson family, who was said to be experiencing paranormal activity inside of their home in 1977, with the daughter Janet even becoming possessed by a former resident. Now, this movie is very much based on a true story, however, when a paranormal experience is dubbed real, people tend to try and find holes in the story, with many doubting the accounts of the family. Like I said, the Enfield Poltergeist was a claim of supernatural activity between the years of 1977 to 1979, with it specifically involving 2 sisters, Margaret and Janet. In August of 1977, single-parent Peggy Hodgson claimed she had witnessed furniture moving and heard knocking sounds around her home. A police officer arrived on scene and he himself reported seeing a chair wobble and slide across the floor without any rhyme or reason. Following this, disembodied voices were heard, loud noises echoed around the home, and the children even began levitating. More than 30 people reported seeing furniture move and heard voices around the home. Ed and Lorraine Warren were of course called in to assess the situation, with them visiting the home in 1978 and were convinced that the events had a supernatural explanation.